In a previous segment, we talked about the essentials of what you need to have in your tackle box. Now, the next step is to select your fishing pole and your fishing reel. And while when you go to a sporting goods store, you can buy the pole and the reel separately, there are a lot of great rod and reel combos. And what we mean by a rod reel combo is that the pole and the reel are already attached and you buy it as a set. If you're just starting out with fishing, buying a rod reel combo is really convenient because if you're unsure of what to buy, it's really nice to just already have it as a set together that you can grab and go. The challenge to that, or the catch, is that it's not rigged up yet. And so the next step and what we're going to talk about today is how you rig up your fishing pole and get it ready to go fishing. You will notice that right now you don't see any fishing line out. You don't see the fishing line threaded through the eyelets of the fishing pole. That's because that's typically when you buy a rod reel combo, that's the way it comes. All of the line is still housed within the fishing reel capsule. Step number one is going to be threading our fishing line through the eyelets of the fishing pole. And in order to do that, I've got to get the line out of the reel here. So the first step to do that is I'm just going to simply push and release the button, which is then going to allow me to pull out fishing line. I want to pull out enough that when I cut the tab, the plastic tab off the end of the fishing line, I don't lose it back inside the reel. So once I've done that, I can go ahead and cut the tab off, which already came off, so we're good there. And what I will do is simply take just a moment and I'm going to feed the fishing line through the eyelets. Personal preference of whether you want to run the tip of the fishing line through like that. I like to bend it over and have like a little loop for whatever reason. It just helps me grab the line and feed it faster. So that's just my own little personal trick that I like to use. Once you get your fishing line through the eyelets, go ahead and pull enough line through to give yourself some slack and working room. I'm going to go ahead and turn my handle till you hear the click. And what that does, that's not going to allow any more line to come out. Step number two is going to be to attach my weight or sinker of choice. Today, I'm going to be using a 1/4 ounce barrel sinker, and it's also known as a sliding sinker. It's hollow in the middle, which allows me to run the fishing line all the way through. Slide the fishing line through the center of the sinker, and that's step two completed. Step number three is going to be to attach a swivel to the end of this fishing line. If you remember from a previous segment, we talked about the swivel a little bit. All this simply does is serve as a connection from where my sinker is to where I'm going to attach my leader and then my hook. I do need to tie a knot to attach this barrel swivel, and any old knot will not do. You do need to learn a couple of basic fishing knots, which we will cover in a future segment, but there is a reason for knowing fishing knots. If we simply tie an overhand knot, it actually weakens the line and it can break because it's half the strength of it original when it's straight like this. So I'm going to do really quick, I'm going to do what we call an improved clinch knot. Nice, strong, sturdy, very common fishing knot. And you'll notice I have a little tag end left once I tied that knot. You do not want to leave that on. That is something that is a visual for the fish that will deter them. And it's also something to snag on brush or rocks when you've cast it out into the lake. Take your nail clippers and cut off that tag end as close as you can to the knot without cutting the knot. Okay, so now we have our sinker attached and we have our swivel attached. The next step is to put on a leader, or if you have purchased a package of snelled hooks, you can go ahead and attach a snelled hook. What is a snelled hook? All that simply means is that compared to a bare hook where you just have the hook and you have to add line to it, A snelled hook already has a short leader or piece of fishing line attached to it. So now I've got to attach the snelled hook to my swivel. And to do that, I'm going to simply pinch that loop so I can feed it through the end of the swivel. It's going to go through the end of the swivel, and then I'm going to take my hook, run it back through the hoop, pull everything tight. And what we have here is the first way to rig up a fishing pole if I want to fish off the bottom. This is a very common setup if you're fishing for catfish and or carp. Now, we talked about in an earlier segment, I mentioned a leader, and I mentioned that I would give a little bit more detail. The leader is simply a length of fishing line between your swivel and the hook. Now, if you want to put your own leader on or your own fishing line, you can make this any length you want. Different lengths of leader allows you to fish different depths in the lake. So that is something that we'll cover in a future segment as well. Right now, all we need to do is attach bait and we are ready to go fishing. Our bobber is a fishing float and it allows our bait to float up off the bottom of the lake. So it'll be suspended in the water. We can attach this bobber to the existing setup that we have here, and now we have a second setup. So this type of bobber, if you will notice, it has two hooks. It has a little hook at the bottom, and if you push the button, that little hook pops out. When you hold your thumb on the bottom here and you push the button again, a hook pops up on the top. So to attach a bobber, step one, we're going to start with the bottom hook. I'm going to pop that hook up where it's visible, and I'm simply going to run the fishing line through and release the button. So I have step one. Step two, I'm going to put my finger over the bottom hook so it can no longer pop out. I'm going to push that button again, and I'm going to run my fishing line under that second hook. Now you're ready to fish with a bobber. Bobbers do more than just keep your bait off the bottom of the lake. They're also a bite or a strike indicator. So when you're the bobber, when you cast out, the bobber is going to sit there at the water surface. If that bobber drops or goes below the water, that tells you you have a bite. Or if it's windy and all of a sudden your bobber is starting to move in the opposite direction of the way the wind's blowing, that's another indication that you probably have a fish on the end of that hook and it's time to set the hook and reel in. If I wanted to fish with a floating bait, such as power bait for trout, the only thing I need to do is just simply switch out my hook and trade it in for a treble hook, because those work best with a dough bait such as power bait. And I'm also going to take my bobber off, because how a floating bait works for that setup is you want your sinker, your weight that you have on there, when you cast your line out into the water, that sinker is going to take your line to the bottom, but then that bait, that floating bait, is going to pop up and float suspended in the water. So those are three basic setups for fishing here in Arizona, whether it's for bluegill, bass, catfish, or trout.